Going from broke to six figures takes everything you've got, okay? Discipline, hard work, sacrifice, timing, and years of pure grind. But going from that to extremely rich usually takes a couple of meetings with the right people. This is the complete guide on how the rich actually get richer. From well-off to generational wealth, these are the systems being used. Welcome to ALUX. What do Legoland, the Hilton Hotel, and Ancestry.com have in common? Well, they're all owned by the same company, Blackstone, the biggest private equity firm in the world. Private equity is one of the most powerful forces in finance, yet most people don't fully understand how it works. You see, any kind of company needs money to grow fast, and there are two ways for them to get that money. First, they could sell shares to the public. That's you and me. Second, they could sell pieces of the company to private investors. That's private equity. And there's more to this. When a private equity firm buys a company, they've got no intention of holding on to it and pocketing the profits. Instead, they buy it with the intention to sell it as soon as it makes sense. So, what exactly is private equity? Where did it come from? And how are people getting so rich from it? Well, let's dive in. So private equity is a way for big investors to buy companies, make them better, and sell them for a profit. And these firms work with 4 key steps. Step 1 is to raise money from outside investors and put it into a special fund. Step 2 is to use that fund to buy companies. And step 3, to make the companies profitable. Once they own the company, they'll go in and restructure it so they can increase profits. So they might bring in new leadership, lay off workers, open up new locations, or make the marketing and branding better. Sometimes these changes lead to huge success stories, and sometimes they backfire. And then there's step 4, sell them for a profit. After 5 or 10 years, the firm sells the company in one of 3 ways. Either through an IPO where it becomes publicly traded again, or they sell it to another company, or they sell to another private equity firm. If everything goes as planned, they sell it for much more than what they paid, and the firm and its investors make a massive profit. So, private equity has been shaping all industries for over a century now, but it didn't start off with this 4-step strategy. In the early 1900s, business tycoons like J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, and the Vanderbilts were already making deals where they bought companies with investor money instead of just their own. But the big difference is that they didn't flip these companies for a profit. No, instead, they bought multiple companies in the same industry, merged them to form massive corporations, and then used that to build their empire. Kind of like in Monopoly, where you build your empire by first building up the same color pieces of land. And after that, you can build your houses, and only when you have enough houses can you build that hotel. Well, back then, the empire took a lot longer to build. All of this changed, though, after World War II. The economy was booming and hundreds of thousands of veterans were returning home. Investors saw this as a golden opportunity for the rise of new businesses. So George DeRoy, a Harvard professor, created the American Research and Development Corporation, or ARDC, back in 1946, the first real venture capital firm. And his biggest bet was on a tiny company called Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC. Now, ARDC invested just $70,000, and when DEC went public in 1968, that investment was worth $355 million. DeRoy proved that private investors could back innovative companies before they made it big. He set the stage for venture capital. By the 1980s, private equity had transformed yet again. This time, it went from betting on new ideas to taking on existing companies and making them profitable. Some deals paid off, while others led to spectacular failures and bankruptcies. But one thing was clear: private equity was now a major force in the financial world. As private equity became more mainstream in the 1990s and early 2000s, it wasn't just billionaires playing the game anymore. Pension funds, university endowments, even governments started pouring money into private equity firms. After the 2008 financial crisis, regulations got tighter, so instead of just slashing costs, they focused on improving operations, bringing in better management, and using technology to increase profits. By the 2010s, private equity was stronger than ever. Today, firms like Blackstone, Carlyle, and Apollo manage trillions of dollars, and their influence extends into nearly every industry, including real estate, credit markets, and infrastructure. And this evolution of private equity also shows us the different strategies that modern firms now use. So let's talk about these different types of private equity, shall we? So JP Morgan's 1901 acquisition of Carnegie Steel is considered the first major leveraged buyout, or LBO, which is the most well-known type of private equity. So an LBO is when an investor or private equity firm buys a company using money pooled from other investors, which is exactly how JP Morgan raised capital back then. Now, modern LBOs work a little bit differently. The firms raise money from investors, just like JP did, but they also borrow a lot of it, and they use the target company's assets to leverage the debt. So here's how that works. Imagine you work for an investment bank, and somebody comes to you with a loan request. They tell you that they need to borrow a lot of money to buy a whole other company, make that company very profitable, and then sell it. And they tell you that instead of borrowing against their own assets, the loan will be backed up by the acquired company's assets and future earnings. This way, if the investment fails, you can recoup that loss from their assets. But even better, if it's successful, you can make a lot of money. It's high risk, which means you can charge high interest rates. The debt is secured against real assets, so you won't face a total loss, and the potential returns are massive. Now, these kinds of firms, the ones that specialize in LBOs, are experts at what they do. They have a history of successfully restructuring companies. In 2007, when Blackstone Group acquired Hilton Hotels for $26 billion, one of the first things they did was appoint a new CEO. Then they moved the company away from ownership in real estate and focused instead on making it a brand management and franchising company. They injected $800 million into it to boost the company's financial health. This allowed them to get bigger loans, and then they used that money to renovate, market, and expand their locations. When Hilton went public again in December 2013, its stock closed at $21.50 a share. Over the next few years, Blackstone gradually sold its stake. By 2018, they fully exited their investment, making around $14 billion in profit over 11 years. Now, that is a leveraged buyout success story, but not all deals pay off that well. You remember Toys R Us? Well, their story is probably the most popular botched buyout of our time. In 2005, multiple private equity firms joined forces and bought the company for about $6.6 billion. Because the deal was structured as a leveraged buyout, they financed the deal with Toys R Us assets and future earnings. All of that debt was placed on the toy seller's balance sheet, just like what was done with the Hilton. But these investors missed a few key things. In the Hilton deal, Blackstone injected that $800 million into the company. There was no kind of cash injections for the Toys R Us deal. Instead, between 2005 and 2017, the firms actually collected more than $470 million in fees and interest from the company. So with the massive debt and extra fees and interest, the company didn't have the money to invest in improving its stores and upgrading to e-commerce, so it fell behind the competition. 12 years after the acquisition, with no way to service its debt, the company filed for bankruptcy. More than 800 stores closed down, and thousands of people lost their jobs. It's cases like this that have brought criticism and controversy to private equity firms. But it's not all like this. In fact, LBOs are a very different strategy to the one Georges Deroit used when he set that stage for venture capital. Now, we say set the stage because his most famous investment, the DEC one we mentioned earlier, was actually a strategy known as growth equity. So growth equity is like the more reliable, sensible cousin of venture capital. It's where firms invest in established, fast-growing businesses that need capital to expand. So these companies are already profitable, but they need funding to scale their operations, enter new markets, or develop new products. Unlike LBOs, these deals use little to no debt, and private equity firms usually buy a minority stake instead of taking full control. This is exactly how TikTok was able to get such a global reach. Two firms, General Atlantic and KKR, invested in ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, which gave them the funds and resources to scale their operations quickly. Whereas venture capital is the high-risk, high-reward side of investing. This is where the firm pours money into small, unproven startups and hopes they'll turn into billion-dollar companies. It's all about betting on new ideas and early-stage companies before they've proven themselves. If the startup succeeds, the investors can make massive returns. If it fails, well, they can lose everything they invested. If you work for a startup or you're up-to-date in Silicon Valley news, then these are the firms that you'll know well. Think Sequoia, the firm that invested early in Airbnb, Google, and WhatsApp. Or Andreessen Horowitz, the firm that invested in Skype, Facebook, and Twitter. Not all deals go that well, though. Sequoia also invested $214 million in the cryptocurrency exchange FTX. When the company collapsed in 2023, Sequoia lost all of that. Venture capitalists also invested $700 million in Theranos, only to lose it all when the technology was found to be fake. Now, the last main strategy is one that generates all of the controversy, and we first saw it during that shift in private equity back in the 70s. It's called distressed investing. So, distressed investing is when firms buy struggling or bankrupt companies on a discount and then try to turn them around for profit. Sometimes, this means fixing operations and making the company profitable again. Like when the firm Up Capita bought Game UK. They did a massive restructuring and, within 2 years, increased the company's market value to more than 12 times what they paid for it. But other times, they cut costs so aggressively and sold off so many assets that they left the company worse off than before. One of the first examples of this was in 1969 when a man named Victor Posner, who owned DWG Corporation, executed a hostile takeover of Sharon Steel. He got the company at a discount and started working on restructuring it to make it more profitable. In 1987, Sharon Steel filed for bankruptcy. Despite so many companies going bankrupt, in 2024 alone, 110 companies backed by private equity ended up filing for bankruptcy. So despite that, private equity has turned investors into billionaires and built some of the biggest financial empires in history. But how exactly does it make people rich? How are these private equity firms making so much money? Well, it's all in the way the deals are structured. From just one deal, the firm is able to create multiple income streams. They're not liable to pay back the loan they've taken out, and they only contribute about 10% of their own money to the fund. Now, for the multiple income streams, they don't wait until the final sale to make money. They charge their investors management fees, usually 2% of the total assets that they manage, and performance fees, which is 20% of profits. Even if a deal struggles, they still collect millions, even billions in fees just for managing the fund. Then, their exit strategy pushes for maximum profit. They don't just sell the company to the highest bidder. They look for the deal that's going to make them the most money. That could mean going public, selling it to a competitor, or flipping it to another firm for more restructuring. And they make sure they time their exits for when valuations are highest. If they restructure the business, increase its profitability, and sell it for $20 billion a few years later, they don't just double their money, they make 10 times their original investment. Then there's the debt. The acquired company is the one that has to pay the loan, and the interest on that loan is tax deductible, so the business can keep more of its earnings. And since they only contributed a fraction of the purchase price in actual cash, their return on investment isn't just a 2x gain, it could be 5 or 10x. And that's how you end up with companies like Blackstone, KKR, and Apollo, private equity firms that manage trillions of dollars and own hotels, media companies, and tech companies. Basically, they own the world, and they're gonna keep getting richer and more powerful. And Alexer, if you like the info you're getting in this video, you will love the deep dives we do on the Alux app. If you download it and scan this QR code, you'll score 25% off as a little gift from us to you. Now, private equity is basically flipping businesses the way you flip sneakers on eBay, but on an enterprise level. Buy low, sell high, profit. But what if you want to flip something bigger, something like entire industries, currencies, and even global events? Well, that's when you graduate to hedge funds. Back in the 1950s, a sociologist named Alfred Winslow Jones had an idea that would change investing forever. He wasn't a Wall Street banker or a stockbroker. He was a thinker, and what he created was the very first hedge fund. Now, what does hedge actually mean? Well, simply put, it means protection. It's like when you buy a plane ticket with travel insurance. If the flight gets canceled, you lose the ticket, but the insurance pays you back some of that money. But Jones applied this idea to investing. He placed bets on companies he believed would succeed and at the time, bet against companies he thought would fail. The goal was to balance the risk, no matter which way the market moved. Fast forward to today, and hedge funds have become, well, pretty much the opposite of what Jones intended. They're often high-risk deals behind closed doors where only a select few are allowed in. So what happened? Well, let's take a look at how modern hedge funds actually work. So modern hedge funds are private investment vehicles reserved for the ultra-wealthy. They're exclusive, lightly regulated, and can pretty much do whatever they want. But to understand how that's even possible, you first have to know how the government tries to protect you from going full degenerate and blowing up your life savings. And it all goes back to the 1920s. The US economy was booming. Companies like Ford revolutionized manufacturing with the assembly line, which meant faster production, cheaper goods, and booming productivity across industries. People had jobs, wages were up, stuff was cheap. For the first time, people were buying cars, radios, fridges, washing machines. Modern life had arrived. Things were going suspiciously well, maybe too well. Investing became America's national sport. Everyone was jumping into the stock market like it was a guaranteed way to get rich. People were borrowing money to buy stocks. There were no rules about insider trading, fake companies, or price manipulation. No one checked if the company you bought stock in actually existed. It was a casino. People just went with the idea that the market will always go up. And by the way, if you're wondering, well, actually, does the market always go up? Well, we've got a video on that. Link is in the description. Anyways, back to the 1920s. Stock prices soared. Company valuations were detached from reality. People were investing in gold mines that didn't exist, airline companies with no planes, and cactus farms in New Jersey. There were no watchdogs, no verified information, just hype, hope, and fraud. Then came October 1929. People realized they were investing in magic pixie dust. So they started panic selling. The market lost nearly 90% of its value over the next few years. Banks failed. Businesses closed. Millions lost their life savings. This crash triggered the Great Depression, one of the darkest economic periods in modern time. Now, to prevent another disaster, Congress stepped in. First came the Securities Act of 1933. It forced companies to tell the truth about their financials when selling stock. Then came the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. It created the SEC, which stands for the Securities and Exchange Commission, a government agency to oversee markets, enforce rules, and protect investors. So these days, if you want to invest in a company, you get real financial data, verified reporting, and equal access to information. You can still make risky bets under this, but now at least you know if the company actually exists. And this gave us two major things. First of all, it gave us transparency. Everyone can see how public companies are doing. And second of all, fairness. Everyone plays on the same field. So how do you get ahead if everyone plays fair? Welcome to modern-day hedge funds. So, after the 1929 stock market crash, Congress introduced strict regulations to protect everyday investors. But what if you didn't want to follow those rules? Simple. You avoid the public market entirely, and that's where hedge funds come in. So hedge funds are private. They don't raise money from the general public. To invest, you have to be what's called an accredited investor. That's a legal term that basically means you're rich. Usually, it means you've got over $1 million in net worth, excluding your home, or you make over $200,000 a year. This is how hedge funds legally avoid public market rules. The law assumes that if you're wealthy, you can afford to lose money and you don't need the same protections as everyone else. It's basically a legal loophole. A hedge fund is, technically speaking, not a fund. It's just a group of people with a lot of available cash. So all the rules and regulations that Congress made don't apply to them because they don't operate in the public market. That's essentially the whole point of a hedge fund. A hedge fund works like this, loosely. So a bunch of wealthy people pool millions of dollars into a partnership with a fund manager. The manager takes that money and says, "Trust me, bro," and heads off into the financial wilderness for a year or two. It's a let 'em cook kind of situation. Nobody really knows what they're doing, not even investors. There's no daily updates, no public reports, and no real oversight. Then, hopefully, the manager comes back with more money than they left with. This leads to an obvious question, though. If public markets are regulated to be transparent and fair, why would wealthy people choose to opt out of that system? Well, the answer is freedom. Hedge funds aren't just buying and holding Apple stock hoping the new iPhone is going to be the best iPhone yet. No. Hedge funds can bet on interest rates in Japan, the collapse of a real estate fund in China, or the spread between oil and natural gas futures in Texas. They also invest in assets most people can't even access. Private loans, distressed companies, rare artwork, niche real estate deals. If something has a price, someone is trading it. These are not your Robin Hood-style investments. No, hedge funds operate in markets that are off limits to the average investor, and they trade things most people never have heard of. They can also take on risks that public funds simply are not allowed to, like heavy leverage, exotic derivatives, or short-selling entire economies. These are strategies that would get a mutual fund manager fired, but in a hedge fund, they're just your average Tuesday. Imagine investing like fishing. Public markets like mutual funds, index funds, regular stocks, these are like fishing off a crowded dock. The water is clear, everyone can see each other's bait, and you can jump in and out whenever you want. It's safe, it's slow, and it's transparent. But catching something rare is almost impossible. Now picture a hedge fund. It's a submarine, a small, highly trained team with sonar, secret maps, and advanced gear diving into deep waters that nobody else can reach. They stay submerged for weeks, make strategic moves that no one can see, and if there's something valuable down there, they'll find it and grab it before anyone on the dock even knows it exists. Unlike mutual funds, hedge funds don't have to tell you what they own. There's no obligation to disclose what they're buying, how much they've bought, or when they've sold it. Now, first of all, they don't want competitors copying their trades. Hedge funds spend millions developing research and models. If their moves were public, others could just copy-paste their strategy for free. Second, market impact matters. If people know a hedge fund is buying a specific stock or asset, the price could spike before the fund finishes buying, which hurts their performance. The same goes for selling. If other investors catch wind of a hedge fund exit, it could trigger a panic sell. Then there's the issue of liquidity. When you invest in a hedge fund, you can't just pull your money out anytime. Most hedge funds have lockup periods of 6 months, a year, or even more. That's because they often invest in things that can't be sold quickly or easily. If everyone tried to withdraw their money at once, well, the fund might be forced to sell assets at fire sale prices, hurting everyone involved. And lockups also give the manager the ability to let their strategies play out. Some bets take months or even years to mature. If investors can yank their money out too early, it disrupts everything. And finally, the part that really sets hedge funds apart. The manager almost always gets paid. Regardless of whether the fund performs well or not, hedge fund managers typically earn a fortune. Unless they completely crash and burn, they collect massive fees, which leads us directly into one of the most controversial aspects of the hedge fund world. And that's the 2 and 20 rule. So at the heart of almost every hedge fund is something called the 2 and 20 fee structure. It's the standard compensation model that's made many hedge fund managers billionaires, even when their investors walk away disappointed. So here's how it works. So the 2 stands for a 2% management fee, and the 20 stands for a 20% performance fee. On paper, that might not sound outrageous, but when you look at the actual numbers, it's easy to see how incredibly lucrative this system really is for managers. Whether the fund makes money or loses money, the manager collects that 2% just for managing the assets alone. It's like a subscription fee, but instead of paying Netflix $10 a month, you're paying millions just to have your money in the room. So let's put it to some real numbers here. If a hedge fund manages $1 billion, that 2% management fee alone brings in $20 million a year. That's before the fund makes a single dollar in profit. Even in years where the fund loses money, that manager still collects the full 2%. Hedge fund managers also get to take 20% of any profits the fund makes. So if the fund has a great year and earns $100 million in returns for investors, the manager gets to pocket $20 million of that. So combine the two, the 2% management fee and the 20% performance cut, and you have a compensation model where the fund manager gets rich in almost any outcome except total disaster. And here's the kicker. The investor takes all the risk, while the manager still walks away with a guaranteed income. If the fund loses money, it's your loss. If it makes money, you split the profits, but either way, the manager gets paid. Now, there are some mechanisms in place that try to make this fairer, like the high water mark. This rule says a fund manager cannot take the 20% cut again until the fund regains its previous peak value after a loss. So if a fund drops in value one year, the manager doesn't get to collect performance fees the next year until they've made up for those losses. And that sounds fair in theory, but in practice, it doesn't change the fact that the 2% management fee still rolls in regardless of performance. And over time, this adds up to incredible wealth for all of the people running these funds. Now, some hedge funds charge even more than 2 and 20. And while investors can try to negotiate their fees, especially if they're contributing large amounts, the basic structure remains the same. The house always wins. And this is one of the reasons why hedge funds have come under criticism, especially in recent years when many of them have failed to outperform simple index funds. Investors look at the fees, the secrecy, and the high risk, and they ask, wait, why are we paying so much when we could just buy an ETF that tracks the market for a fraction of the cost? It's a fair question. The 2 and 20 model worked back when hedge funds consistently delivered what's called alpha, returns above the market average. But over the last decade, many hedge funds have struggled to do that, especially after fees. Yet, despite all of this, hedge funds continue to raise billions from wealthy individuals, pension funds, endowments, and institutions. Why? Well, because while the performance might be inconsistent, the access, exclusivity, and potential for asymmetric returns still attract the elite. And because, for the ultra-wealthy, hedge funds offer something more than just financial performance. Which brings us to our final question today. If hedge funds are high risk, high fee, and often underperform, then why do the rich still keep coming back? In Alfred Jones's world, hedge funds were a strategy to minimize risk. But today, a hedge fund is more like a private club for rich people. If you were pitched a product that charges high fees, locks up your money, keeps you in the dark about what it's doing, and might not even beat a basic index fund, you'd probably pass, right? So why don't rich people? Why do the ultra-wealthy, the people with access to the best financial advisors, the most advanced data, and every investment option under the sun still put billions into hedge funds? It's not just about chasing returns. It's about something deeper, something cultural, psychological, and strategic. So let's break it down, okay? First of all, hedge funds offer access to strategies that most people will never see. This includes high-frequency trading algorithms, global macroeconomic plays, bets on political outcomes, interest rate shifts, or regulatory moves, complex derivatives, and private market opportunities that don't show up on any stock exchange. These are not things you can buy with your online brokerage account. Hedge funds operate in parts of the market that are often out of reach for traditional investors, and that exclusivity is part of the appeal. For the ultra-wealthy, investing isn't just about earning 6% or 7% a year. It's about gaining access to things that can't be indexed. Hedge funds are one of the few places with asymmetric risk. And if you don't know what that means, we've got a great video about it, okay? The link is in the description. It's the kind where you risk $1 to make $10. Most of those opportunities don't exist in public markets anymore. Hedge funds, they're out there hunting for them even still. Then there's the issue of time and convenience. For many wealthy individuals, managing a portfolio full-time just isn't practical. Hedge funds allow them to offload the responsibility of finding unique opportunities to somebody else. They're paying not just for returns, but for mental bandwidth. Think of it like this, okay? Hedge funds are the financial equivalent to a private chef. Could you cook your own meals? Of course you could. But would they be as good as someone trained at a Michelin star kitchen with access to rare ingredients? Probably not. Next, networking and social capital. This is the hidden value of hedge funds, and maybe the most important part. Hedge funds operate like private clubs. Getting in means access to other investors, strategic relationships, insider deal flow, and social positioning. Being a limited partner in a top-tier hedge fund isn't just an investment decision. It's a badge. It says, I have access. I am part of this circle. I get to hear things before the rest of the world does. You won't find that on a brokerage app. There's also risk diversification. Wealthy investors already have real estate, stocks, private equity, art, maybe even their own business. Putting a slice into hedge funds with strategies that don't move the same way the market does helps to spread the risk out a little bit. Even if the fund underperforms, it might reduce overall portfolio volatility, and for some, that's worth it. Then there's the cultural aspect. Hedge funds still hold a certain mystique, right? They're portrayed in movies and headlines and pop culture as the financial elite's secret weapon. The idea that you might be connected to the next Renaissance technologies or Citadel, the ones generating billions in profits through secrets and science, is powerful. And even if most hedge funds don't hit a home run, the hope is that you're in the one that does. Ultimately, it's about legacy, power, and status. Hedge funds offer a layer of strategic control over capital that isn't available in basic investments. They can align with tax strategies, estate planning, geopolitical bets, even philanthropic plays. Being part of a hedge fund means being part of the ecosystem where wealth is created, protected, and moved behind closed doors. Hedge funds started as a way to reduce risk, a clever idea from a sociologist who wanted to balance fear and greed in the market. But over time, they evolved into something very different. They operate in a world that most people never see, a world with fewer rules, more tools, higher rewards, but also higher risks. They can win big or lose big and disappear overnight. And yet, despite all of that, money keeps flowing in. Hedge funds are not about returns, they're about access to a room where bigger deals are being made. For most of you, that room is the public market, safe, regulated, and transparent by design. And it's not a bad thing. It's the result of lessons learned the very hard way. So next time you hear about a hedge fund making billions or collapsing in flames, you'll understand what's really happening behind the curtain. And you know, all of the knowledge that we're sharing with you here today, most of it came from the pages of our favorite books. We love books. We read thousands of them, and some of them have literally changed our lives in unimaginable ways. And that's exactly why we've curated a list of the top 100 books that will level up your life straight across the board. Get that list totally for free at alux.com/100books. Now, you've heard the phrase, trust fund, baby, right? Silver spoon in hand with the future already secured. Hedge funds are designed to be risky but highly profitable bets. But the real magic isn't the money, okay? It's the system that protects it. This is the most misunderstood financial tool in the world, and it's next on our list. Trust fund. 6'5", blue eyes. That is probably the general picture that you have in mind when you hear trust fund, am I right? Spoiled kid, Lamborghini, Instagram famous, the whole spiel. But, that's actually the exact opposite of what trust funds are made to do. Because you see, trust funds are not about spoiling someone overnight. They're about controlling wealth across time. It's how the rich make sure the money they earned, invested, and protected doesn't vanish in one generation. And here's what most people don't realize. Making millions is the easy part, okay? Keeping it for more than one generation is the problem. A trust fund is essentially a legal system, a set of rules that says, this money doesn't move unless I say so, even if I'm not around anymore. Trust funds allow the rich to delay access to money until a certain age, control how that money is used, education, property, business, and enforce those decisions through a third party who isn't emotionally attached to the beneficiary. And there's one more reason. It's the most powerful of them all. And we'll get to that. Sit tight. So the rich use trust funds because, well, they don't trust their kids. This is about discipline at scale. They're saying, I built this empire and I'm not letting one idiot in the bloodline blow it all. Now, according to data, more than 9 out of 10 people worth over $30 million have at least one trust fund in place. In fact, this is one of the first things they do once serious money enters the picture. You see, there is a curse plaguing wealthy families. It's called the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations curse. So the first generation is working class, in shirt sleeves. They work hard and build a fortune. The second generation grows up wealthy, benefits from success, but doesn't understand what it took to get there. The skill is lost. Then comes the third generation. They inherit whatever money is left. They don't have any skills, and they lose it all, ending back into the working class, back in shirt sleeves. It's a full circle of hard work, wealth, then back to hard work again because wealth wasn't preserved. The same idea exists in many cultures. In Scotland, they've got a saying, the father buys, the son builds, the grandchild sells, and his son begs. Studies show that 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the second generation, and by the third, 90% is gone. This prompted the rich to be extremely careful with the fortune they build. Even celebrities and athletes, people you might assume are reckless with money, have gotten smarter. The money from endorsement deals, royalties, and even properties, everything goes into trust funds. Like Shaquille O'Neal telling his oldest son, I'm rich, we are not rich. But how does this process work exactly? Well, step 1, you create the rule book, the trust document. Everything begins with a trust agreement, the legal document that outlines the rules of the game. This is where the grantor, the person setting up the trust, writes down what assets will go into the trust, who will receive them, the beneficiaries, under what conditions they'll receive them, and who is in charge of enforcing those rules, the trustee. This document becomes law, and once it's signed, it is legally binding. Step 2. You appoint the enforcer, the trustee. Now, the trustee is like a human firewall. They're the one who makes sure everything goes according to plan. You can pick a family member, a lawyer, or a bank or trust company. Step 3, you fund the trust. This is the part where you actually put stuff into the trust. And that means transferring ownership of real estate, cash, stocks, business interests, artwork, crypto, even intellectual property. As a matter of fact, celebrities will start putting their voice, image, and digital identity into trust funds. Just imagine scrolling Netflix in like 2080 and seeing Morgan Freeman narrates the AI Civil War. Anyways, back to the topic. There are multiple types of trust funds, but these are the main ones. So there's the revocable trust. You can change it, cancel it, or update it anytime while you're alive. Great for avoiding probate and keeping things private, but still a part of your estate for tax purposes. Then there's the irrevocable trust. Once it's created and funded, you cannot take it back. But here's the trade-off. Those assets are no longer yours, which means they're no longer taxable when you die. This is the go-to strategy for reducing estate taxes and protecting wealth. There's the GROT, the Grantor Retained Annuity Trust. That's where you're putting assets, like stocks, into the trust. You receive annual payments for a few years. The leftover growth passes on to your heirs tax-free. It's a favorite tool among billionaires who expect big returns. There's the Spendthrift Trust, for the heir who, well, let's just say, can't be trusted. This provides limited payouts over time, protecting them against reckless spending. And there's the Charitable Remainder Trust. So you get income during your lifetime, then the rest goes to charity. It's a major tax advantage today with a legacy move at the end. And you could even set up a generation skipping trust where you skip your kids entirely with all of the wealth going to your grandkids. And this is where things get really interesting in the conditions. You can write almost anything you want into that trust, provided it's legal and enforceable. For example, you could say, my child gets $50,000 a year, but only after they turn 30. Or distribute $100,000 only if they graduate college. Or cut off access entirely if they marry without a prenup. Or match whatever they earn in their career, dollar for dollar. After all that's said and done, all that's left is to fill up the vault with your fortune. And that, dear Aluxer, is where the real magic happens. This is one of the main reasons people use trust funds. Because you see, once you transfer ownership of your assets to a trust, those things no longer are legally yours. And if you don't own them, well, the government can't tax them like they're still a part of your estate. Trust funds are built to outsmart the system. Now, Aluxer, have you heard of the Walton family? That's the family that owns Walmart. They're one of, if not the richest family in the world. They collectively own more than $600 billion worth of assets, spread across 3 generations. The wealth is held in a complex web of trust funds and private holding companies, and the main goal is to preserve the wealth and minimize taxes. And here's how that works. So when it comes to avoiding estate taxes, when someone dies, the government takes a bite out of their estate. It's called the estate tax, and in the US, it hits anything above $13.6 million at a brutal 40% rate. Translation? You die, and the government takes almost half of what you spent a lifetime building. Don't worry though, your Steam account is safe. Nobody's taxing your 600 unplayed games. Then there's something called freezing asset values. So let's say your company is worth $1 million today, but you expect it to grow to $10 million. If you put it into a trust now, your estate is only taxed on the $1 million, even if it skyrockets later. The growth? Well, that belongs to your heirs, completely tax-free. Then there's the GROT trust fund that we mentioned earlier. It's a tool that lets you gift future growth of an asset to your heirs, while still getting paid in the short term. So here's the move, okay? You put $10 million into a GROT. You receive annual payments for, say, 5 to 10 years. Any gains above a set interest rate go to your heirs tax-free. If the investments perform well, your heirs can receive millions, and the IRS gets almost nothing. You ever wonder why every rich billionaire out there has a charitable foundation? Well, you can put money into a charity trust. The trust invests that money. It uses the investment returns to pay you a fixed stream of income. You no longer own the money. It legally belongs to the trust. And when you die, whatever is left over goes to the charity. But you still get income for years and a tax deduction up front. There are dozens more structures like these, Aluxer, but we're not turning this into a legal seminar for you, okay? The point is, trusts are the legal infrastructure the rich use to minimize taxes across generations. Do it right, and you get families like the Waltons, still growing their fortune decade after decade. Do nothing, and you get what happened to Prince. He died with no trust, no will, no plan. What followed was years of legal chaos, court fights, and wasted money. The world of trust funds is pretty complex, and we just scratched the surface today. At least you know what's going on, though. But that brings us to the real question. What are you building that is worth protecting? You see, a trust fund is a legal protection. It's like saying, all of this money that I have is, technically speaking, not my money. And we could go one step further. What if that money isn't yours and it's not even here? What if the company that actually owns the money exists only on paper in some drawer of a random building somewhere on an island? This is the Ugland House. The modest 5-story building located somewhere in the Cayman Islands. And in 2020, around 20,000 companies had a registered office there. Now, like Bernie Sanders tweeted, that's either one very crowded building or a phony address used for one purpose: to avoid paying taxes. US President Barack Obama called it the biggest tax scam in the world. This is just one of the many, many ways the rich use offshore accounts to stay invisible. Welcome to offshore banking. Now, the world's wealthiest people, from celebrities, politicians, and CEOs, all use offshore systems as a normal part of their financial planning. Places like the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and the British Virgin Islands have financial systems designed for privacy, flexibility, and tax efficiency, and they actively compete to attract wealthy clients from around the world. It's insanely profitable without needing to produce anything. Unlike countries that rely on exports or tourism, these places have turned banking secrecy and favorable tax laws into an entire industry. Experts estimate that over $10 trillion is currently held in offshore financial centers around the world. That's more than the GDP of Japan, sitting quietly in jurisdictions most people couldn't even point to on a map. A report from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development shows that this offshore system accounts for an estimated 8 to 10% of the world's total household financial wealth. Over $800 billion of that wealth sits in Swiss banks, hundreds of billions more in Hong Kong, Singapore, Luxembourg, and the Caribbean. But, what is offshore banking, really? Well, at its core, offshore banking just means putting your money in a country where the financial rules are different and more favorable for you. These countries are called offshore financial centers. They offer a mix of 3 things that make them irresistible to the wealthy. Things like low or zero taxes. Some have no income tax, no capital gains tax, or no corporate tax at all. They've got privacy laws. Your name doesn't show up on public records, and in many cases, not even on internal banking documents. And loose reporting systems. You don't have to explain every dollar the way you would in, say, the US or the UK. If you're rich enough to matter, these countries want you as a client. Now, before we walk you through how it all works, you need to first understand one very crucial distinction. The rich don't own anything. Their companies do. This is what makes everything possible, okay? And this is the difference between traditional banking and offshore banking. Because if you're a salaried employee, your income is reported before it even hits your account. Every paycheck is taxed, every bonus is tracked, every bank transfer above $10,000 is flagged and reported. Under laws like the Bank Secrecy Act, or BSA, and FATCA in the US, you must report foreign bank accounts over $10,000, declare foreign-held assets on annual tax filings, and disclose sources of income in detail. You miss a form and you could be fined, audited, or even charged. Everything about your money is visible by default to the government, to the bank, and sometimes even to third-party services. But let's do an example, all right? Let's say we've got 2 fictional millionaires. James lives in New York and earns $1 million a year as a salaried CEO. And Mike, who earns $1 million through a trust registered in the Cayman Islands and paid via a foreign holding company. So here's how this plays out. James gets a paycheck. His employer reports it to the IRS, withholds taxes, and pays him what's left. He lives in a high-tax state, so he's losing nearly half his income to taxes before he even sees it. Mike, on the other hand, doesn't technically earn a salary. He set up a trust in the Cayman Islands that owns a holding company in Luxembourg, which owns licensing rights to the software he developed. When money comes in, it flows through these entities, and Mike receives payments as distributions or dividends routed through countries with favorable tax treaties or no income taxes at all. Technically, Mike owns nothing. He decides when and how he gets paid. And this is where people confuse tax avoidance with tax evasion. Tax evasion is when you illegally avoid paying the taxes you owe, like getting paid in cash and not reporting it. That's a crime. Tax avoidance, on the other hand, is perfectly legal. It's when you use the rules to reduce what you owe, like writing off a business dinner or claiming depreciation on your car. Now, what happens when the smartest lawyers and bankers in the world make tax avoidance their full-time profession? Well, you get offshore banking, my friend. A system designed to follow the letter of the law while sidestepping most of the tax bill. Which brings us to one of the most famous examples of tax avoidance in modern history. This company bent the rules so far it caught the attention of the entire European Union. The Apple case. Now, Apple's offshore tax strategy is one of the most famous examples of legal tax avoidance in modern history. In the early 2000s, Apple set up subsidiaries in Ireland that technically owned the rights to sell Apple products outside the US. This allowed them to funnel profits from iPhones, iPads, and Macs sold across Europe, Asia, and Africa into low-tax entities, avoiding the standard corporate tax rates almost entirely. Thanks to a now-closed loophole in Irish law, Apple structured things so that these companies were stateless, not taxed in Ireland nor anywhere else. For a full decade from 2003 to 2013, Apple rooted more than $120 billion through this setup. At one point, their effective tax rate dropped to just 0.005%. That's $50 in tax for every $1 million in profit. Instead of paying for the $40 billion they would have owed under US law, Apple paid just $600 million. And this right here is how it happened. Apple set up two special companies in Ireland. These weren't regular businesses with offices and employees. No, they were basically legal paper shells designed to collect profits. Then it gave those companies the rights to sell everywhere except the US. So now, when Apple sold an iPhone in France or Japan, the profits went to Irish Apple, not the US company. Now, normally a company has to pay taxes somewhere, usually based on where it's incorporated or where it's run from. But Apple found a loophole where these two things didn't line up, and that created a gray zone. So if you had a company incorporated in Ireland, but you didn't actually run it from Ireland, you wouldn't pay Irish taxes. Meanwhile, US tax law said we tax companies based on where they're incorporated. So if your company was incorporated outside of the US, it didn't automatically owe US taxes either, as long as the money stayed offshore. So Apple created companies that were incorporated in Ireland, so not taxed by the US, but managed from the US, so not taxed by Ireland. That means neither country taxed them. These subsidiaries became stateless entities. They legally existed, but no country claimed the right to tax their profits. Now, eventually, the European Union stepped in and said, hey, this seems kind of illegal. And they fought for over a decade until Apple lost in 2024, and it was ordered to pay $14 billion in back taxes. Now, many, if not most, of the world's largest corporations use some form of offshore banking to avoid taxes. Apple, Amazon, Google, Meta, Nike, Starbucks, and Microsoft have all been documented using complex offshore structures to minimize their tax bills. And according to the OECD, more than 40% of multinational corporate profits are shifted to low or no tax jurisdictions. According to the Panama Papers, over 140 public officials and billionaires used offshore shell companies to hold assets in secrecy. Then in 2021, the Pandora Papers revealed that over 35 world leaders, including presidents and royalty, were linked to hidden wealth through trusts, companies, and private foundations, most of which were perfectly legal. A study by the Tax Justice Network found that more than $10 trillion in assets are held offshore, and most of it is under the name of companies, not individuals. When most people get rich, they put their name on everything, but the rich, they take their name off everything. That mansion? Not in their name, it's owned by a company. That yacht? Well, it belongs to a holding firm registered in Bermuda. Even the bank account that funds their lifestyle? It's controlled by a trust or a foundation, not a person. If you don't own it, it can't be taxed, sued, or seized. And this is how it works, simplified. Step 1 is to create a company that exists only on paper. You start by setting up a shell company in the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, or some other tropical tax paradise. This company doesn't have an office, employees, or products. It might just live inside of a filing cabinet at a law firm. But on paper, it's real and it can legally own things. Step 2 is to let the company own the wealth. Now, instead of putting your name on the deed to your mansion, the company owns the mansion. Instead of opening a Swiss bank account in your name, the account belongs to the company. You don't own the yacht or the art collection or the intellectual property. The company does. So if someone comes after your assets for taxes, lawsuits, or political reasons, you shrug because technically you own nothing. Step 3 is to add a trust to seal the deal. And this is the final layer. The company that owns the wealth is then owned by a trust, based in an entirely different country. And the trust isn't in your name either. You are not the legal owner, you're just the beneficiary. You get to live in the house, sail the yacht, use the jet, but nothing is tied to you directly. That is how you end up with a $150 million super yacht owned by a company in the British Virgin Islands, held by a trust in Jersey, managed by a nominee director in Panama. But, okay, if your name isn't attached to your money, how do you actually spend it? Because the moment you transfer money from an offshore account to your personal one, especially in your home country, it becomes taxable. So you borrow against it. When Apple needed money to spend in the US, rather than pay taxes to repatriate its offshore profits, it borrowed against them. If you've got billions sitting in an offshore account, you can use those assets as collateral and take out a loan, often at ultra-low interest rates. This way, you get access to cash without triggering a tax event. And then you borrow again, and again, and again, and again until you die. It's an actual strategy called buy, borrow, die. This is going to be the last and final step that seals the deal. But before we get there, how does one actually manage all this stuff? Because there are 3 stages of your relationship with money. Stage 1, you worry about money because you don't have enough. Stage 2, you stop worrying because you have more than enough. And stage 3, you start to worry again because you have so much money it's becoming a problem, and managing everything is a full-time job. Somewhere past the $100 million mark, you're no longer a wealthy person. You're more of an institution. Money is now referred to as capital. That's when the spreadsheets become staff. And in the world of the rich, the staff is called a family office. And this is how they operate. And just a quick side note here, my friend, if you're enjoying this video, there is so much more where this comes from, okay? So subscribe to the channel and you won't ever miss a beat. So any person with a basic financial understanding can manage $1 million. You put some of it into a safe stock fund that grows over time, a bit into bonds that pay you some steady money, some into real estate so you own a building or land, and keep a little cash in the bank for emergencies. You can essentially do everything from your phone and just live off the money it makes, comfortably for the rest of your life. But what happens when you have $1 billion? Because look, okay, a bit of $1 billion still means literally hundreds of millions of dollars. At that level, you're earning millions in interest per month. You might own multiple businesses, properties in different countries, art collections, complex equity positions, and legacy obligations. Even your charity work becomes a logistical beast, requiring lawyers and accountants just to give money away. Wealth, when it reaches this scale, behaves more like a corporation than a bank account. Most people only deal with professionals like lawyers or investment managers a handful of times in their life, if ever. Maybe a lawyer for a will, a banker for a mortgage, or an advisor when retirement is near. But for the ultra-wealthy, those needs are constant. Legal questions come up weekly. Big financial decisions happen daily. Managing assets, taxes, investments, and even reputations requires a full-time team. So instead of hiring people one by one for every problem, it's just easier to bring them all in-house. You hire your own lawyer, your own banker, your own tax strategist, put them on a payroll, and make their full-time job managing your wealth. That's essentially what a family office is. If you are Batman, the family office is Alfred. Okay, so there are more family offices now than ever before, and they're managing trillions of dollars. The rise of tech billionaires and crypto millionaires created a new wave of first-generation wealth, and with it, a need for customized infrastructure. Traditional banks weren't built for 29-year-olds with $400 million practically overnight. That's where family offices came in, offering speed, discretion, and tailored control. As of 2023, estimates suggest there are over 12,000 family offices globally, with more than 7,000 based in the US alone. That number has doubled in the last decade. According to research by UBS and Campton Wealth, the average family office manages around $1.2 billion in assets, but some, like the Walton families or Bezoses, oversee tens of billions. Now, collectively, family offices are estimated to control between $6 and $10 trillion in global wealth. And a massive generational wealth transfer is underway. Over the next 20 years, more than $84 trillion will pass from baby boomers to Gen X and millennials, and that money needs managing. At that level, private banks and wealth managers just aren't enough anymore. You need a full team, tailored to you, working only for you. This surge in demand has even created a family office arms race, with ultra-wealthy individuals competing to hire the best talent, poaching lawyers, investment analysts, even PR experts from top firms to build up their own private teams. And because they handle everything in-house, family offices develop their own proprietary investment data and insights, giving them an edge over even elite hedge funds or traditional advisors. So, why exactly are these family offices so sought after? Well, when you hit the $100 million plus mark, your financial life gets exponentially more complex, not linearly. We're not talking about moving from 1 to 2 homes. We're talking about 30-plus legal entities across multiple countries, 5-plus asset classes like stocks, private equity, real estate, etc., 3-plus generations with inheritance plans, personal assets like yachts, jets, you name it, as well as staff from security, assistants, pilots, the list goes on. Now, imagine trying to pay taxes in 3 different countries, track ROI across dozens of investment vehicles, plan for inheritance for 3 kids without them fighting, shielding your assets from lawsuits or divorces. I mean, it's a full-time job for multiple people. And according to Campton Wealth's Global Family Office report, the average family office employs about 14 full-time staff. And that's for millionaires, not even for billionaires. Now compare that to Bezos Expeditions, Jeff Bezos' personal family office. It reportedly employs around 159 professionals, from lawyers and analysts to philanthropic strategists and venture scouts. To put that into perspective, that's more advisors than most kings had running their entire courts, and their sole job is not to run a kingdom, but to manage one man's fortune. In 2019, Jeff Bezos finalized the most expensive divorce in modern history. His ex-wife, Mackenzie Scott, walked away with 25% of the Amazon shares the couple jointly held, worth around $36 billion at the time. Now, most people saw the headlines about the size of the payout, right? But what went unnoticed was how clean and frictionless the entire financial transition appeared. There were no drawn-out court battles, no messy disclosures, no massive tax events. And that's because the structure was already in place. The family office handled the transition behind the scenes. It coordinated asset transfers, updated trust structures, and managed risk exposure while keeping Bezos's long-term financial blueprint intact. The office, it didn't react to the divorce. It absorbed it. His control over Amazon remained stable, his wealth continued compounding, and most importantly, the legal and tax implications were minimized through pre-arranged strategies crafted years in advance. In high-profile divorces, brand value can definitely take a hit, but Bezos' public image and Amazon's market confidence barely even wobbled. And that's coordinated behind-the-scenes damage control executed by a family office with a crisis protocol. So, after saying all of that, when should you consider a family office? Well, let's just say you sold your tech company. After taxes, you walk away with $500 million. Congratulations, my friend, you are rich, but now the real work begins. First, your money lands in a private bank. Once you've got more than $1 million in investable assets, the system officially tags you as a high net worth individual. And that label upgrades your banking experience. No more call centers, you're now assigned a relationship manager and you get access to private banking divisions. It's a VIP treatment, but in the wealth world, you're still at the entry level. Cross 30 million in assets and you become ultra high net worth. Now, along with the title, that sounds kind of like a Dragon Ball Z power level, you unlock access to more elite financial tools, hedge funds, private equity, and co-investment opportunities. Banks might even offer global family office services, pre-built teams that manage multiple wealthy clients. It's not a personal family office yet, but it's a preview of what's to come. But only once you pass the $100 million mark do you enter a different league. Now, some banks assign full-time, white-glove teams whose only job is to serve you. But by then, you might be asking a different kind of question altogether. Why am I still using the bank's people when I could just hire my own? The bank exists to make a profit, so their advice will always carry some kind of bias. Your lawyer says you need an estate plan, your accountant warns you about exposure to different tax jurisdictions, your spouse wants to buy a vineyard in Italy. Each problem spawns 5 more. You're dealing with private bankers, fund managers, lawyers, and nobody's talking to each other. It's a bit chaotic, right? And that is when a family office becomes a viable option, a good choice. And this is how you set it up. So, you form a limited liability company, and you name it after your favorite mountain. Naming it after a favorite mountain or childhood street might sound kind of poetic, but it also makes it pretty hard to Google. You base it in a place that offers favorable tax laws and privacy. Some go with Delaware in the US for its flexible corporate laws and anonymity. Others prefer Singapore, Switzerland, or Dubai, places known for financial privacy, tax efficiency, and investor-friendly regulation. And this becomes your family office. It's just the headquarters. The team might be remote. Then you start to hire, and usually the order is as follows. Money first, then safety, then growth, then logistics. Your first hire is almost always someone who used to manage wealth like yours, but for somebody else. Usually a former private banker from a top institution. You offer them better pay and total control. They track every dollar, reduce exposure, and keep you from making expensive mistakes. They consolidate your balance sheet, cash, stocks, real estate, startup equity, art, crypto, yachts, all of it. This person becomes your chief financial officer. Next, the CFO brings in a lawyer, usually specialized in generational wealth. You want someone who eats up trust laws for breakfast, the kind who can set up multi-generational vehicles that survive lawsuits, divorces, or unexpected deaths. They draft your trust documents, create additional holding entities, and firewall your assets. Then comes the tax specialist, ideally a former IRS insider or someone who worked for the Big Four. They know the loopholes, the treaties, and the lines you shouldn't cross. They design a tax map that minimizes your burden without ever triggering the wrong kind of attention. At this point, your money is secured, but it's not growing. So you bring in someone with deep access to private deals, hedge funds, and off-market real estate, a chief investment officer. This person will oversee all investments from private equity and hedge funds to real estate and venture capital. And lastly, you hire for logistics. You might need a family office manager, a philanthropy director, or a lifestyle concierge. In Silicon Valley, some family offices hire life coaches or mindfulness consultants for their clients' children to help them grow up balanced in a world of access. The Gates family office has a dedicated philanthropy infrastructure. Every dollar gifted is a part of a long-term impact strategy. Some hire former diplomats to help with international travel or relocation planning. Others bring in art curators to manage collections worth millions. But with all of this said and done, there's still one big problem, right? All we did so far is transfer ownership and manage assets that, technically speaking, belong to somebody else. So how do the rich get access to actual cash? So there's this running joke that a billionaire wouldn't bother picking up a $100 bill off the ground because in the few seconds it takes, they would earn more just by standing still. But here's what most people get wrong. Billionaires don't earn money the way you think they do. When you see headlines of big CEOs earning tens of millions of dollars as a salary, they're not getting a single dollar in cash. It is all equity, and it's never meant to be sold. This creates a system that can only be exploited by those who own assets. It's called buy, borrow, die. And this is how it works. The illusion of income. So most people think that wealth is about income, right? You work, you get paid, maybe you get a bonus, a raise, or even a pizza party from HR if things go well. Your financial life revolves around how much money hits your account every month. That's what you live on. That is your income. But that's not how the ultra-wealthy think about money. No, in fact, for them, income is a bit of a problem. Because income, as in money paid to you for your labor, is taxed aggressively. In the US, high earners can lose up to 37% of their income to federal taxes, and even more when you add in state and payroll taxes. That is why the wealthiest people on Earth avoid it completely, okay? Elon Musk got exactly $0 in pay from Tesla for multiple years. Warren Buffett gets paid $100,000 a year in base salary for the last 40 years. Jeff Bezos' salary for being the CEO of Amazon was around $80,000 a year. Mark Zuckerberg's base salary is $1. The list goes on, okay? You get the point. So, while most people earn in wages, the wealthy earn equity, meaning shares in companies they help to build or invested in. Their wealth isn't sitting in checking accounts. It's tied up in stock, private businesses, investment funds, and other appreciating assets. And none of that wealth is taxed as long as they don't sell anything. And this is where the tax system quietly benefits capital over labor. It's called the realization principle. So, you don't pay tax on the gains of an asset until you sell it. So, if your investment goes up in value, you're richer on paper, but you owe nothing. Let's say you buy a house for $100,000. 20 years later, the same house is worth $1 million. Now, you don't suddenly have $1 million in your bank account, right? The value is locked in the property, and you'd have to sell it to access the cash. And since you haven't sold anything, the IRS isn't going to show up asking for taxes just because the house increased in value on paper. That's what accountants call an unrealized gain. If you don't sell it, you don't pay taxes on it. And rich people never sell anything, because the moment they sell, they trigger a tax bill. So, while most people chase income and get heavily taxed for it, the rich build structures that allow them to grow wealth silently without realizing it on paper. And this raises a question. If they aren't getting paid in cash and they never sell anything, how are they funding their lifestyles? I mean, some liquid cash has to come from somewhere, right? Well, they walk into a bank and ask for millions, and they get it almost for free. That's where the real financial games begin, okay? Because when regular people take out loans, they get trapped in debt. When the rich take out loans, They get even richer, and they stay that way. Welcome to the consumer debt trap. So when most people take out a loan, say for a house or a car, they're entering into a financial relationship where the terms are heavily stacked against them. The average U.S. household carries about $148,000 in mortgage debt, part of an almost $12.6 trillion total mortgage burden. And with the 30-year fixed mortgage rate hovering around 6.85% in mid-June 2025, nearly double the rate from 2 years ago, this is not easy debt. So let's just do the math, okay? A $250,000 mortgage at 6.85% over 30 years means monthly payments of about $1,600. Stick with that schedule and you'll repay around $576,000, more than double what you borrowed. The first decade is almost entirely interest. You're paying for the privilege of living somewhere, not building equity. Credit card rates, often 18 to 25%, strip away even more. Auto loans and student loans follow suit. You're paying triple-digit interest while barely chipping away at the principal. But that's only part of the burden. You pay those loan payments with after-tax income. So let's say your mortgage payment is $19,200 a year. To cover it, you need to earn about $29,500 before taxes if you're in the 35% bracket. That means you're paying income tax and interest simultaneously. And this double squeeze is why most people never escape the rat race. They take out loans with after-tax money and pay the bank interest on money they never fully get to use. Meanwhile, the bank assumes zero risk. They've collateralized your asset, whether it's your house, your car, or your business. If you miss enough payments, they take it back and resell it. You don't own your home, the bank does. You're just renting it from them until the final payment clears, decades later. This is how the system extracts value from the working and middle classes, and it's all happening because you are considered high risk. So here's something that most people don't realize, okay? The bank doesn't really care how much you earn. It cares how safe your money is. If you make $150,000 in a year, but you've got no savings, no collateral, and a volatile job, you are a red flag, my friend. You might feel middle class, but to the bank, you're a walking liability. They check your credit score, your debt-to-income ratio, your employment history, everything that signals whether you'll make these payments reliably. That's why someone making $40K with a paid-off house might be more bankable than someone earning $200K and drowning in credit card debt. This is why consumer loans have such high interest rates. You're paying for the perceived risk of lending it to you. And now we're finally getting to the buy, borrow, die strategy and what makes this possible. So, the average person borrows a huge amount of money compared to what they own, to the point that it takes them literally decades of hard work to pay it back. This makes them high risk. The rich, on the other hand, borrow a small amount compared to what they currently have. This makes them low risk, and banks love them. So the buy, borrow, die strategy, essentially it works like this. You buy assets that appreciate in value and you never sell them. You borrow money against those assets so you've got money to spend. Then you die and everything resets. And this is how you do it in detail. So phase one is buy. It all begins with ownership, right? The wealthy don't aim to stack cash. They acquire appreciating assets, things that grow in value over time. This includes stocks, real estate, private businesses, intellectual property, and sometimes even fine art or farmland. The goal isn't to flip or sell these assets quickly. No, it is to hold on to them for as long as possible while they increase in value. That's why every big CEO is paid almost exclusively in stock options. The wealth isn't sitting in a bank account somewhere, it's compounding inside assets. And crucially, as long as those assets aren't sold, they're not taxed. This is the core idea behind unrealized capital gains. If your stock portfolio grows from $1 million to $5 million, that $4 million gain doesn't trigger any taxes unless you sell. On paper, you're wealthier, but the IRS doesn't care until you cash out. The same applies to real estate. Imagine buying property for $2 million. A decade later, it's worth $6 million. Unless you sell or refinance, no taxes are due on that $4 million appreciation. This allows wealth to snowball. But appreciation alone doesn't pay the bills. So what do you do if you're worth $100 million but you don't want to sell anything? Well, that brings us to the next move. Phase 2, borrow. And when you've got a sizable portfolio, banks are eager to help, okay? So let's say you own $100 million in Amazon stock or commercial real estate. You go to a private bank like Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan and say, I want liquidity, but I don't want to sell. The banker smiles and says, well, let's set up a credit facility. They'll evaluate your holdings and offer you a line of credit based on a loan-to-value ratio, typically 50% for stocks, 60 to 70% for real estate, and potentially higher for more stable holdings. So if you've got $100 million in real estate, the bank might give you $60 to $70 million as a low-interest loan, secured by your assets, no capital gains tax, no selling required. This is the closest thing we have to literally free money. So let's make this concrete, okay? You take out a $50 million loan at 2.5% interest. You use $5 million for lifestyle, homes, jets, staff, philanthropy. You invest $20 million into new ventures or funds. And then you roll the rest into more appreciating assets. Your annual interest payment is $1.25 million, and even that might be deductible if you structured it properly. Meanwhile, your original assets continue to grow. If they rise to $150 million over the next decade, you can borrow more, refinance, or restructure. You've effectively turned paper wealth into usable capital without triggering any taxes. This is the part where the rules most people live by simply don't apply. If a regular person borrows money, they're hit with high interest rates, monthly principal payments, and wages that are taxed before debt is even paid. The system assumes you're a risk. But when you already own the assets, you are the collateral. You don't owe the bank anything. You're partnering with them. The bank is happy to give you a small interest because you're a constant source of cash flow for them. Wealthy bank clients borrow hundreds of millions, roll over loans for years, and most likely use the same bank for investing, estate planning, and family office services. So even at a 2 to 4% interest rate, that is a massive long-term income stream for the bank. That is why the rich pay less in interest, less in taxes, and get more access to credit. Which brings us to the final act, Phase 3, die. Because eventually, you will die, and the last phase is triggered. So here's where the step up in basis comes in. So imagine Grandpa bought $1 million worth of Apple stock back in the 1990s. Over 30 years, that stock grows to be worth $10 million. If Grandpa were to sell it while alive, he would owe capital gains tax on the $9 million profit, potentially 20% or more federally, plus state taxes. That's at least $1.8 million lost to taxes. But Grandpa doesn't sell. Instead, he holds onto those shares until the end of his life. And when he dies, something remarkable happens. Under the current U.S. tax law, the cost basis of those shares resets to their market value on the day of death. So instead of inheriting shares with a $1 million basis and $9 million in taxable gains, you now inherit them with a $10 million basis. You didn't gain anything, technically speaking, so if you sell the stock the next day, you owe $0 in capital gains tax. The tax liability vanished with Grandpa. Now, this same principle applies to real estate, businesses, and other assets as long as they're held until death and passed on correctly, often through trusts or estate planning vehicles. So, what about the loans in all of this? Well, in many cases, wealthy individuals take out large life insurance policies, often held inside irrevocable trusts, specifically to pay off debt upon death. The insurance payout settles the outstanding loans. The heirs receive clean, unencumbered assets. The wealth transfer is smooth, tax-advantaged, and precisely engineered. The original owner lived for decades, borrowing against appreciating assets, paying minimal taxes, enjoying incredible liquidity, and then passed the wealth down to the next generation tax-free. No selling, no income, no capital gains, no estate tax, if planned properly. This is buy, borrow, die. So, what happens if the assets you borrow against don't actually go up in value during your life? Well, take a look at almost any financial crises the world has ever faced. From 1928 to 2009, most of them had one thing in common. People borrowed for more than they should, assuming their assets would always go up. But when the markets turned, the debt didn't go away, and that is when everything breaks. So let's do a quick recap on the complete guide of how the rich actually get richer. Step 1, you grow your initial wealth through exclusive investments like in private equity and hedge funds, which are available only to the already rich. Step 2, you transfer ownership to the newly acquired assets to trust funds in order to reduce taxes and control wealth throughout generations. Step 3, you position those trusts and their assets offshore, where taxes are optional. Step 4, you build a dedicated family office that handles everything. Step 5, you get access to cash by borrowing against said assets, and when you die, your kids inherit everything tax-free. The debt is repaid by your estate, which usually greatly increases in value during your lifetime. You see, the rich aren't necessarily smarter or more disciplined. They have access to tools the rest of the world doesn't. And once you pass a certain wealth threshold, those tools become available to you too. But how you get to that initial stage, well, it's up to you, Aluxer. We hope you learned something valuable here today, my friend. Thanks for spending some time with us. We'll see you back here next time.